He was a kid from Brooklyn. Then he was a weapon. For 70 years, he killed people he'd never met for reasons that were never his. Everyone calls him the Winter Soldier. Nobody asks what it takes to stop being one. 1944, a train, the Alps, a man falls. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. What got pulled out of the cold wasn't a man anymore. It was a project, a prototype. They took his name, they took his face, they took everything he remembered and replaced it with orders. He had a life. Then they handed him a gun and pointed him at it. For 70 years, nobody asked him what he wanted. Nobody asked him anything. He was a weapon. Weapons don't get asked questions. They get pointed. Then, a man in a red, white, and blue suit said his name out loud on a bridge in Washington, D.C., and something woke up that had been buried so long it didn't know it was missing.
Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky?
That's where this story really starts. And here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. This is not a redemption story. Stop calling it that. Redemption is something you earn back after something you chose. Bucky didn't choose anything. He was a prisoner of war who had his mind taken apart and rebuilt as a weapon. And then the world asked him to apologize for it. This video is about what's actually wrong with that and why getting it right matters more than you think. Before any of that, you have to know who he was first, because if you skip this part, the rest of it doesn't land. James Buchanan Barnes, Brooklyn, scrappy, funny, the kind of guy who walked toward trouble so his smaller friend didn't have to walk into it alone. He looked after Steve before Steve was anyone special. That's the detail that matters. He wasn't following a superhero. He was protecting a kid from his neighborhood who kept picking fights he couldn't finish. That's who Bucky was at baseline. Someone who chose people. Someone whose whole identity was built around showing up. He enlisted. He led men. He was good at it. Not because he was made to be, but because he was. And then he fell off a train in the Alps and nobody came for him. HYDRA found him first. And what happened after that isn't a story about a man becoming dangerous. It's a story about a man being taken apart, piece by piece, over decades. They took the arm first, then the memories, then the name. Then eventually, the ability to form a continuous sense of self at all. Cryo between missions. Trigger words that collapsed whatever was left of him into pure compliance. 70 years of being pulled out of a freezer, handed a target, and put back when the job was done. There's a critical term for what HYDRA practiced on him: coercive control. It's what happens when someone systematically dismantles your sense of reality until the only version of truth you can access is theirs. It doesn't require a chair and electrodes, though HYDRA used those too. It just requires enough time and enough power and a person with nowhere else to go. Here's what most people miss when they watch those scenes. They're watching a man kill people, but they're actually watching what prolonged captivity does to identity. Psychologists call it complex PTSD. The ICD-11 formally recognized it in 2018, and the distinction from regular PTSD matters here. Regular PTSD comes from a single event or a short period of horror. You survive it, you carry it. CPTSD comes from repeated, prolonged trauma, the kind where escape wasn't an option and the threat never fully stopped. The symptoms are different: identity disturbance, difficulty trusting anyone, including yourself, emotional flashbacks that look like movie flashbacks. They look like going blank, going cold, going somewhere else behind your eyes. Shame, deep structural shame that doesn't lift when the anger does. And disassociation, the feeling of watching your own life from a slight distance, like the person doing things isn't quite you. Watch Bucky in the early scenes of The Winter Soldier. Watch his face. That's not a villain. That's disassociation with a mission. And then there's the other wound, the one that's harder to name. Moral injury. It's a term from military psychology, and it describes something specific. Not just trauma from what was done to you, trauma from what you were made to do. The specific damage of being used to violate your own values. Bucky didn't want to hurt anyone. That's not who he was on that train. And whatever HYDRA stripped from him, they couldn't strip out the part that registered the wrongness of it. It just got buried, layered over. And when the layers started to come off, what was underneath wasn't relief. It was the full weight of every mission he hadn't chosen. That's moral injury. It's the wound most people never get a name for. And Bucky carried it for years before anyone called it what it was. There's one more piece: trauma bonding. The reason people who've been controlled for long enough sometimes feel a pull toward the people who controlled them. Not because they loved the abuse, because their nervous system learned to organize itself around that relationship, around the rules of it, around what was expected and what would happen if they failed. When that structure disappears, the survivor doesn't automatically feel free. Sometimes they feel groundless. Sometimes they feel like they did something wrong by leaving. Bucky's whole early recovery is shaped by this. He didn't know how to want things for himself. He'd been told what to do for so long that wanting felt like a foreign language. And that's not weakness. That's what prolonged coercive control does to a person's inner compass. So what does recovery actually look like? Not the montage version. Not the dramatic scene where someone cries and a mentor says the right thing and the music swells. The real version. For Bucky, it starts in Wakanda. And it's almost nothing. A hut, goats, days with no mission and no one giving orders. That's it. That's the beginning. And here's the thing about that.
Good morning, Sergeant Barnes.
Bucky.
How are you feeling?
Good. Thank you.
The thing people don't say. Sometimes recovery is supposed to be boring. The nervous system needs stretches of time where nothing is required of it, where there's no threat, no performance, no role to fill. That's not stagnation. That's the first condition. You can't rebuild a self while you're still in survival mode. Wakanda gave Bucky the one thing HYDRA never did: unstructured time that belonged to him. Then the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, court-ordered therapy, a rule-following exercise with Dr. Rayner that he resists at first because of course he does. Trust doesn't come back on a schedule, but there's the notebook. There's the book of names. That one matters more than it looks. Writing down the names of people you harmed isn't punishment, it's acknowledgement. It's the first step in making the harm real rather than keeping it behind glass. The goal isn't guilt. The goal is contact. You have to be able to look at what happened before you can do anything about it. And Bucky, looking at that list, carrying it, that's not self-flagellation. That's a man trying to get honest with himself about the life he was a part of. And then there's Yori. This is the part of the arc that most people don't talk about enough, and it's the most important part. Yori is the father of a man Bucky killed as the Winter Soldier. Bucky finds him, spends time with him, eats with him, listens to him grieve. He doesn't confess right away. And that decision is the most psychologically precise thing the writers gave him. Because if he told Yori the moment they met, who would that have helped? It would have been Bucky's confession, Bucky's relief, Bucky's need to unburden himself at someone else's expense.
He was murdered by the Winter Soldier. What? And that was me.
He waited. He sat with the discomfort of knowing. He let the relationship be about Yori first. That's what real amends looks like. Not the apology that makes you feel better, the presence that costs you something. He stayed in that discomfort because Yori mattered more than Bucky's need to feel clean. And then there's the small stuff: choosing his own clothes, getting a phone, keeping a notebook that no one told him to keep, cooking breakfast, having no plan for the afternoon. These things sound small because we've been trained to measure recovery by dramatic breakthroughs, by the moment someone breaks down and finally feels it. But the actual work of coming back to yourself after someone else took you over is almost entirely made up of small decisions. I will eat this. I will go here. I will call this person. I will sit with what I'm feeling instead of filing it away. The most heroic thing Bucky Barnes does in his entire Phase 4 arc is exist as a regular person on a regular Tuesday. That doesn't look like a hero moment, but it is one. Now this stops being about Bucky. You don't need a HYDRA to be used. Sometimes it's a parent who needed you to be someone else so they could feel okay about themselves. Sometimes it's a partner who slowly moved the edges of what was acceptable until you couldn't remember what you'd originally agreed to. A job, a community, a friendship that required you to perform a version of yourself that wasn't quite real, and you did it long enough that the performance started to feel like the truth. And the hardest part of leaving isn't the leaving. The leaving is one day. The hard part is the year after. The part where you look at your own habits and can't tell which ones are yours and which ones are leftovers from someone else's rules. The part where you make a choice and don't know if you're making it because you want to or because you were trained to. That's the Bucky moment people recognize without knowing why. That's the look he has in the early scenes. Not blank, just borrowed. Here's what the shows get right that most stories about survivors don't. Recovery doesn't look like becoming someone new. It looks like remembering who you already were. Bucky in Wakanda isn't becoming something else. He's finding the parts of himself that HYDRA didn't reach. The parts that were still there, still intact, still his. That's what the farm and the quiet mornings are doing. They're not building something from scratch. They're uncovering what was always underneath. And that process is slow. It doesn't announce itself. One day you wake up and you have an opinion about something small, something that has nothing to do with survival or performance or what someone else needs from you. And that opinion feels like yours. That's the day. That's what it costs and what it looks like when it arrives. You are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. That's the line this whole arc is pointing toward. Not said dramatically, just demonstrated. In the notebook, in the hut, in the years of sitting across from Yori and not making it about himself. In the choice, every single day, to be a person rather than an instrument. Bucky's story doesn't resolve cleanly. He still carries it. He'll probably always carry it. But carrying something is different from being controlled by it. And the gap between those two things is where the whole arc lives. That's why it still lands, because most people watching it know what it feels like to carry something they didn't choose. Most people know the specific weight of being made into something by someone and then left to figure out who they are once that someone is gone. Recovery isn't a montage. It isn't a breakthrough moment in a rain-soaked parking lot. It's 1,000 small choices to be a person again, made on days when being a person is the hardest available option. Bucky makes those choices without applause, without anyone watching, without any guarantee that the person he finds underneath is gonna be someone he recognizes. That's the real story. Not the mission, not the arm, not the fight scenes. The notebook, the goats, the breakfast, Yori, the choosing. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own long walk back, Bucky's story is for you. It's slow, it's quiet, and it counts.